And literally, billboards, commercials, all about getting kids to pull up their pants, right? And our kids found out about that and thought that was the most amazing thing ever. And the teacher, rather than saying, oh, come on, you can find a better issue, and then said, okay, youth culture, this is important, why is this important, da-da-da-da. And he challenged them to really research it deeply. And the kids wrote a letter to the deputy mayor. They wrote an email to the deputy mayor saying, hi, we're students in an 11th grade, class in Philadelphia, blah, blah, blah. We'd like to speak to you about this. And they Skyped in the deputy mayor of Dallas for a 40-minute interview in their English class. Guy got off, teacher spoke to him afterwards and he said, man, if the press was this tough on me as your kids were, I would have needed a new job. Unbelievable learning experience for the kids. They don't, schools for a long time were black boxes. That's where the learning was. And we know why. It's because that's the teacher, the adults, the parents were all off doing their work. So we created this wonderful babysitting system. But schools don't have to be defined by walls anymore. If you're studying something in a science class and you don't have the kids talk to an expert in the field, if you're reading a book in an English classroom and the author is living and you don't try and bring that author to your class somehow, what are we teaching kids about the experience that they're experiencing in the world? Why do we think that we have to be the gatekeepers of all knowledge? We're not. I also think the schools need to be collaborative, right? Your idea will be better, or my idea will be better if it interacts with your idea and is changed by it. Synthesis works. Interestingly, in the rest of the world, everybody's figured that out now. But in schools, in too many places, even in the way teachers live their lives, it's let me close the door to my classroom, do what I do. I've done it this way for 35 years. I was really upset when we got rid of the mimeograph machine, because then I had to turn everything digital. And let me do what I do. Leave me alone. Collaboration works. Interesting, this is one place where I will actually contradict myself, which is the one thing that businesses say more and more and more and more they want kids to have is the ability to work together. And what we always say is, yes, but when they take the test, how do we know which work is whose? Who cares? Is it better because they work together? Good. Then we did our job. I also think schools have got to be about great passion. If nothing else, kids should graduate from us with a sense that there is the ability to do amazing things, right? One of the things, this is sort of the cliche that we use at SLA, is what if high school wasn't just preparation for real life? What if high school was real life? What if we dared kids to do real work that mattered now? What he is doing, this is Lonnie, and Lonnie is cutting the sheet metal that got used for the flow process biodiesel generator. Those kids in that engineering program build real things that matter. They know their work matters. The solar thermal water heater that they built is being used in a hospital. The actual thing itself is being used in a hospital for amputee victims in Sierra Leone. That flow process biodiesel generator, we know of schools in Central and South America that built what our kids designed and are using it to power their schools. What if we did real work that mattered? I also think today's got to make a whole lot more sense. And that is the difference between treating our classes as silos and treating our classes as lenses. How many people have tried to follow one of your students through a day? What did you experience? What was it like? Exhausting. Anything else? Just that was the frustrating I just heard? Confusing. Schizophrenic. Do we need no other impetus for change than our own experiences when we walk through our halls? So at SLA, kids, number one, they take English, history, and science as a cohort. We stream them. And then we have essential questions and grade-wide themes so that classes are not lenses, or not silos, but lenses. So that as you were studying Hamlet in 9th grade, and you were watching him figure out his identity, you were also studying African American history and looking at the identity of a people as they define themselves. And you were studying biochemistry, always looking at how do these systems relate to who I am and what forms me. Identity is a grade-wide theme in 9th grade. Systems is a grade-wide theme in 10th grade. Change is a grade-wide theme in junior year. Classes are no longer lenses, but silos to ask deep questions. In ninth grade, what we do is they also take their electives as a cohort. In ninth grade, we do that wonderful educational term, mandatory electives. We do it for a reason, but we still can laugh at ourselves. But what you see in this project is in their art class in ninth grade, as they were studying the periodic table of elements, their art teacher was teaching linotype, the stencil stuff. And they had to make a linotype of one of the elements, and then defend how they made that choice and what the artistic representation and why and da-da-da-da. And the cool, amazing thing that came out of that was this gorgeous mosaic of the periodic table of elements. Now that happened in art class, but it deeply reinforced the learning that was going on in science, and it gave them a reason to learn the art. That's what happens when we integrate the day. That's what happens when we can look, not just, and again, interdisciplinarity, right? I mean, and again, I am an English teacher. So that was what I taught for many years. And in my old school, we did all kinds of interdisciplinarity. It was really wonderful. Except, and history teachers in the room, I blame you for this, oftentimes interdisciplinarity meant the history teacher said, hey, we're studying the Civil War. Could you read this Civil War book for us in the English class? And there was this great day where professional development day, we decided the English faculty and the history faculty needed to sit down and have a come to Jesus meeting. And it was my job, the English teachers had planned well, we had an attack, we were ready. And it was my job to stand up to the history teachers and say, excuse me, but when do you all teach the history of Danish rules of succession? Because I want to read Hamlet. And of course, which is why thematic learning, essential questions, when the inputs are common, we can do really amazing things. When kids see it's not just as, ooh, let's do a project, but rather let's think about things across disciplines. And at the end of the day, the point of all of this is to get to a place of metacognition, right? We want our kids to be very thoughtful about the way they think and learn, right? It's about thinking at the end of the day. What that leads us to is authentic assessment. Assessment is real and transparent. It is not whether or not you can guess what I put on a test. It is about whether or not you can build something, do something that takes what you have learned and transfers it to something of your own creation. We know that the ability to transfer information from one place to another and make sense of it is the highest form of understanding. And yet so much of our assessment is regurgitation. Wow, it's brighter on my screen, I swear. What that leads us to is understanding-driven and project-based learning. By the way, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more after the break, how many people think that you do project-based learning in your classrooms? Okay, about 20 to 30% of them. In my opinion, there's a litmus test question. If you say you do project-based learning, here's my litmus test question. If you say you do project-based learning at the end of a unit, what is your manner of assessment? If your answer is give a test, you don't do project-based learning. You do test-based learning with projects along the way to keep the kids interested. And that's cool and that's fine, but let's recognize that for what it is. Project-based learning is when the work of the kid's own head, heart, and hands is the highest form of work done in the class, not the thing you do to keep them busy. One other caveat about project-based learning, if you give a project out and you get 25 of the exact same things back, you didn't give a project, you gave a recipe. Project-based learning means the kids have the opportunity to own something about what they do, not just follow steps to completion. All of this is a different model of schooling for some folks, not for everybody, but for some folks this is a very different model of learning. And what we have to ask ourselves, because it's important, this is not a panacea, is what do we gain and what do we lose? What you gain in this model is incredible empowerment. What you gain in this model is kids who can do, kids who see themselves as active agents in their own education, who think that schooling is not just something done to them. What you lose is the soft illusion that you can measure everything a student has learned from you. Because if you want to, assess for... if you want to measure every last fact and figure a kid has learned, a test is still the best way to do it. But so what? Here's the other thing you got to worry for in this model. I like to say it this way, which is the best thing about SLA is we have incredibly, incredibly empowered kids. The worst thing about SLA, we have incredibly, incredibly empowered kids. And this is a true story, this is from my own teaching. When I was in the classroom one day, and Danny Gradis raised his hand, and he said, "Mr. Lehmann, your class today," "Yes, Danny," "a bit teacher-centric, don't you think?" And in that moment, before I strangled him, I had to remember that Danny felt empowered to say that, because the night before he was there till 6:30 at night working on a project. And the conversation he and I had after class was about learning how to say things with kindness and care, and appropriateness, and what have you. And I pointed out he wouldn't want me to shout out everything wrong with an essay that he handed in for the entire class. Perhaps I was having an off day. But he felt, so in this model, the battleground is, and be absolutely sure that this is a battleground, is between empowerment and entitlement. You will fight it. And you will think you've won. And then a week later, you will fight it again, and again, and again. But it beats fighting the battle of asleep or bored every single day. I'd rather be there. That's where I want to fight the battle. So you brought me here to talk about technology, and I haven't really done that, except I have. I think technology needs to be like oxygen. Ubiquitous, necessary, and invisible. It's got to be everywhere. It's got to be part of everything you do. And then you got to stop talking about it quite so much. How many of your schools still have computer labs? How many of your schools still have pencil labs? Just curious. Now, it's a fun laugh line, but pencils are cheaper, that's why, we know about that. But the fact is, and it's funny because comparative to most rooms, this is actually very interesting. How many people are currently, whatever notes you're taking or whatever you're doing it on a device? Raise your hands. How many of your kids do that in your classrooms every day? Right? You ask me to take notes. Ugh. But I like to look stuff up, I like to, whatever. So we have a new teacher to SLA. He just came to us last year. He's a wonderful teacher, but he's definitely learning the paradigm. And he asked a question, he was talking in class, and now I'm forgetting the word he used. But he used a word, sort of an aside. And the kid raised his hand and said, what does that word mean? And he said, hang on, I'll get to that in a second. And I leaned over to the kid, because I was, doing my walkthroughs, and I said, look it up. And he said, but Mr. doesn't like us to use our laptops unless he tells us to. And I said, look it up. I outrank him. We have, when we don't make it about, okay guys, let's take out the technology now, but rather we allow for its authentic use, it becomes powerful on a level that we can not even dream of. Do we need, and I say this to people when they come visit SLA, and they're like, well, what are we going to see? I said, what you'll see? You'll see kids, I said, chances are you will see kids eye-chatting when they're not supposed to be. And chances are, if you look on a kid's web browser, at least one or two of their tabs will not be classroom-related. I ask those of you who have your laptops out right now, how many of you have one or two tabs out that are not classroom-related? I'm not offended. And if the answer is none, wow. I'm more engaging than I thought. But that's okay. Kids work that way. We need to teach them how to do that. I remember when I was in a classroom, when I was getting my principal certification, and it was the middle of the playoffs. And not many people were bringing in laptops yet. And I was, and this school was Wi-Fi. And the professor leaned over to me, or actually, and he said it in a sort of staged whisper so everybody would hear it. He goes, make sure we all know what the score is, okay? Because he knew I was taking notes, I was paying attention to his class, and